very timely topic. I'm not sure how you guys managed to organize such an important topic in such an event. A week before Poland, climate change and ESG is everywhere. And the topic which I would like to talk to you about this morning is ESG in a Trumpian world. Why Trumpian world? Because Trump is instigating a more broader change than just himself. The impact he's making in the US in terms of the Supreme Court means that the political environment will be shifting to the right. He's also representing people who have felt disenfranchised from the overall globalization. And this is going to be something which will be facing us, I think, over into the medium term. So we're seeing a change, a political change, which we need to address. So what impact could this have over the next few decades? But let's start somewhere more virtual. This is a movie I enjoy. It's called The Kingsman. It's like a James Bond movie. Some of you may have seen it. And this is a particular scene where they're having a conference. And it's a virtual reality conference. And looking out 30 years' time, I don't see why we would not be having the same thing. And in fact, Dylan and Beth and Caroline would be organizing a virtual conference. I would not be here. You would not even need to be here. We would be in a virtual environment. We would ensure that costs are lower in terms of the traveling. Our carbon footprint would be lower, more efficiency, and the work-life balance would be better. So this is conceptually the future. But this is not the future. And why this is not the future? And I was discussing this with my wife, in fact, funnily enough, last week on this slide. It is not the future because it's not representative. The people around that table are all white, middle-aged men. This is not what the future is going to be. And I think this is an important fact to consider going forward. It's not just about the E, it's also about the S, it's about the G, the buy side, the asset managers dealing with this very much on a corporate level. And this is going to be something which we need to be aware of and address. But back to reality, I alluded to the fact that climate change is very much a very topical issue, and we have seen that carbon dioxide is in the news, methane, nitrous oxide. There has not been any improvement. Since 1985, it's been going up. In absolute levels, no improvement. Relative, yes, because we've seen levels of growth, industrialization, so per level of growth, the CO2 has been reducing. But really, absolute level, it's increasing at the same sort of rate it has been since the 1980s. We're very far away from the pre-industrialized levels. Where does that come from? I think we all know where this has been coming from. Clearly, China has been seeing the growth in China has been a key impact of that, whereas the US and the Eurozone, the Europe has been coming down. The issues, however, are going to be India, which is going to start increasing over the next few decades, and one which is not there, which is Africa. We should not be forgetting Africa. The world today is 7 billion. By 2100, it's going to be 11 billion, of which half of that, roughly, is going to be in Africa. So Africa is going to be coming through into that scene. We're at the epicenter. We care about this. Clearly, this audience cares about this more than anyone else. We are in Germany, we're in Berlin, in Germany, in Europe. So we're at the epicenter of this topic. And 83% of those basically who care are in this space. We're having Poland, we had Paris, we had Kyoto. But caring and us doing our part is not enough. We need to engage with the rest of the world, especially with the developing world, to ensure that that forms part of their gradual industrialization. Beautiful, clean coal. I'm sure some of you cringed when you heard President Trump talk about that. But coal is still very much evident across the industrialized society. In Europe, it still forms a part. The key concern clearly is in the Asia Pacific. And there are ways and gradual ways where we're going to be seeing a move away from that, but it's going to be very gradual. Coal is at the top at about 40%. This goes back to 1985. The renewables are gradually picking up momentum, and we do expect that to continue into the future, but it will take time. And if we go back to 1900, if we look at this chart here, back to 1900, coal was the predominant source of energy. It's been gradually coming down. Oil has also been coming down since the 1970s, and the non-fossil fuels are gradually expected to appreciate. Recently, we're going to be seeing gas overtaking coal, clearly, but non-fossils will still represent a smaller part of the broad allocation going out to 2040. And coal is going to be still a component part of India and Asia, whereas OECD will be reducing it. There are two big trends we're seeing. One is the millennials, the second is women. The fearless girl from State Street, I think, is a good representation of the statue which came up. The millennials, a shift in terms of the norms and values, more mindful, more caring of the environment. These are true attributes which would be making a difference, both at an individual level and at a corporate government level. But, and this is a big but, this is serious, and clearly part of the reason why Trump came in power is this anti-establishment. And back in 2016, I expected him, I wrote about that, expecting him to come in through, because I could see that sort of disenfranchisement of the blue-collar worker, of the Brexit, of the National Front, taking key place. And if we analyze Trump's core base, by the way, this is a great internet site called Gallup, the US Gallup, and you can go in and analyze for all the various presidents in the past, the various biases from education, monthly income, sex, religion, and politics. So we can see here in red that Trump supporters are quite in favor of him, especially the more Republicans, the conservative Republicans, in broadly approximately 80 to 90%. He's got a very strong base. Why? Because he delivers on what he says. We may not agree with what he believes, what he says, but he delivers on it. And that adds credibility to his core base. And his core base are predominantly white, 50-plus, churchgoers, South and Midwest, males married, earning over $5,000 a month. These are the people who feel most disenfranchised from the globalization. They feel their positions are at risk, both versus men versus women, but also from a geographic perspective. But I think he's going to still win the 2020 elections. I think we're going to be having Trump until January 25th or January 20th, 2025. And I believe Trump will win, number one, because the economy will continue to do well. I think we're going to be seeing a gradual slowdown in the US economy, not the same levels, but we won't be having a recession until 2021, in my view. So the economy will be doing well. Secondly, he's got the support from his core base. Third, what he has is the delivery. And the key important part, there is no unifying Democrat candidate to go against him at this point in time. Obama won, obviously, previously, because it was at the end of W's second term. It'll be more difficult to find someone to bring together the quite sort of ununified Democratic Party. So what impact will that have going forward? Well, in one stroke, he totally made G7 irrelevant. When we were in Ottawa, in Canada, the G7 became a G0. His second address in the UN General Assembly, we reject the ideology of globalism, we embrace the doctrine of patriotism. And the biggest shock to the European politicians was his lack of multilateralism. And the US federal government has taken part, has exiting the Paris Agreement. Luckily, the individual states and corporates are still, a number of them are sort of ascribed to it, but still, it does make a note. But the world will not stand still. This is giving an opportunity to China to proceed in a more multilateral environment, partly because of the BRI initiative, which is in their benefit, but also building a Beijing consensus, which is also going to work for them. Russia, Japan, likewise. My worry is Europe, and this is sort of a concern of mine. My concern has been for a number of years the eventual departure of Merkel, because Merkel kept the Eurozone together. Even when Draghi said whatever it takes, Merkel was behind him to support. And with Merkel out of the scene, this is going to put a little bit of uncertainty as to who is leading within the EU and what are the likelihood in terms of the future of the Eurozone, especially over the next few years. And that's why Manfred Weber, sort of a leading candidate in terms of taking over the EC presidency from Juncker, again, a thought from Merkel. And domestically within Germany, which is going to be very important for the rest of the EU, we have two dynamics. One is clearly the change of CDU leadership, continuity and no change, I think, with AKK. Some sort of shift much to the right. The SPD is not in the picture because of the compromise that they did. And Greens, very strong upcoming developments of the Greens. We saw that in the local state elections. And I expect them to come into the government as well. So in terms of the impact this will be having over the next sort of few decades, the OECD, we're going to be seeing the same sort of prime energy demand, no big shift. The shift will be in the emerging markets. That's the key driver that we need to address. What can we do? What are the expected changes we're likely to see from that? Well, this is a German term, I'd hate to pronounce it wrongly, Kinderkrankheiten, which is teething problems. The German car industry was not ahead of the curve. The Teslas were there, the Nissans were there, the Germans were not. And I think the reason they were not is they missed the first trick, but now they're trying to catch up. VW sort of looking to invest over 40 billion euros in that. We've had Audi, we've had BMW, and a very good friend of mine, they have a company which is putting together the navigation system, the charging points for the navigation system for all the electric cars, which is coming live as of the 1st of March 2019. So all the German car manufacturers have agreed very quickly to have this in place by the 1st of March. So whenever you have an electric car, immediately you will see what the charging points. So there are some changes taking place. What was quite shocking, I think, for Daimler a few years ago, I met with some of the executives, they had sent their senior managers to Silicon Valley to have a chat with local guys, professional guys, take them out, restaurant, bars, and so on. The guys didn't care about cars, they didn't care about the social aspect of it, they didn't use it, they didn't own it. That was a awakening call. So the environment we're going to be looking at is not only about the cars, the sort of the automation, the electric, but it's also about the environment and the infrastructure around it. And yes, electric cars are the future, but not with its current state of battery. The current battery is not providing any E issues, but it's providing S issues. And Amnesty International has been quite vocal about it. Financial Times, a number of organizations have identified that lithium and cobalt, in the way that they're being used today, is not efficient, number one, and is not socially positive. So we're going to be seeing a change within, hopefully with R&D in terms of the development of smarter batteries, which can last longer, and we can store the power as well. The other big question, in terms of the broader car industry, is how many cars can we have? Again, we're going to be moving from 7 billion to 11 billion people. It won't be able to deal with it at a traffic level. Gridlock is the great leveler of the 21st century. Whether you're Zuckerberg, whether you Bill Gates or me, you're going to be taking the same number of hours traveling to the city center. And so therefore, having the equivalent of 11 billion cars traveling around is a no-go. So sharing is going to be certainly one of it. The other is, are you going to be going over or are you going to be going under? Some companies believe it's going to be flying cars. Others say, well, the noise of drones plus the power it would take in terms of battery, transferring 4 people or 6 people with their baggage from A to B is going to be impossible. So Elon Musk has sort of created the boring company, which is underground. So building tunnels where cars will be driven like sort of utilities, like a pipeline, taking cars through. But whatever it is, whether it's overground, whether it's underground, what's important is going to be shared or solo. And some of the mopeds, electric mopeds, 5 or 6 kilos, you can put them in the backpack, you can use the public transport in whatever way it is, and then pop on that and sort of have the solo experience of traveling. But more looking forward into that, it's going to be very much on the shared side. The other impact this will have is smart highways. We can use the highways in a number of ways, from refueling in terms of reducing all the accidents, efficient traffic control, which is going to be a big positive. The other positive is going to be in the city centers. I'm sure the various supermarkets, the Aldis, the Lidls, the Tesco's, the Sainsbury's, use a lot of significant space for the car parking. That won't be there anymore. You can replace that with social, affordable housing. But change, again, takes time. And a number of analysts here expect it to be between approximately 5% renewables growth per annum. And the electric vehicles gradually to increase about 200 to 300 million by year 2040. So that's transport and cars. The other issue is housing. And this is anecdotal evidence. I have not checked it. I want to check it. I meant to check it before here, but I haven't. But I was told that 40% of the waste in Germany is linked to the building materials industry. And here I have example, Werner Schorbeck is he's a professor in Stuttgart, an architects professor. He's a thinker. He also has and creates prefabricated houses, sustainability. And the same with Rockwool in Denmark. So zero emissions, zero energy, zero waste. The houses of tomorrow are not going to be the houses of today. This is going to be very important. Local produce is also going to be critical. In terms of expense, yes, it is more expensive, but also something which we need to address in terms of the cost effectiveness of what we're contributing to. The other industry which will be disrupted, itself a disruptor, is clearly the biotech industry. As I'm sure many of you know, that there are cancer treatments, very expensive, €500,000 a year in order to deal with that. It's a discriminator between rich and poor, something we want to move away from. And the biotech industry has been benefiting from the disruption it has had in the pharmaceuticals industry. Itself now, the biotech industry is looking to be disrupted by bringing in external specialists from other fields to make more efficiencies on the operating, on the admin, on the costs. So we expect biotech also to be disrupted. Bill and Melinda Gates have been investing significantly into that, and a number of them in German companies. And an example, again, of plastics, moving away from plastics, the thinking of moving back into stainless steel, because plastics cannot be used in the testing, and silicon doesn't exist for obvious reasons. There's the shortage of silicon in the world. So shifts we're seeing in the pharmaceuticals industry. Another area is technology, and at this I was shocked. I was really shocked in that. 2 weeks ago, I was reading in the New York Times. It was two or 3 weeks, October the 26th. I was reading in the Silicon Valley, in the New York Times, that the Silicon Valley parents do not allow their nannies at home to allow their kids any electronic gadgets. So the nannies have to sign that their children will not have iPhones, iPads, PCs, TVs, telephones, nothing, whether they're in the house or if she's taking them outside. So technology, as we're seeing it, is going to be moving into nanotechnology, into machine-to-machine, Internet of Things, into virtual reality, but maybe not as much as we would expect on a personal level. And Dr. Mary Aiken, I'd suggest that book, very highly recommended. She talks about the cyber psychology of that. What impact will that have in our psychology, in our kids' psychologies going forward? The other area where we can take ownership, and this is an old colleague of mine. Some of you may know him from the industry, James Hand. He was in Investec Asset Management before, and he set up Geeky. It's an app which you take the phone with you, you go to the supermarket, you look at the barcode, and it'll give you a rating of how ESG positive it is, or how efficient it is, from organic, whether it's been plant tested, animal tested, the recycling, and it gives you a badge, sort of 2 out of 6 or 4 out of 6, and also an alternative package or an alternative brand with the same, which does the same. So these are ways that we can be taking ownership and responsibility on our day-to-day practices across the various sectors. Pornography, gambling, tobacco, and meat. Meat, obviously, as I'm sure a number of you know, is creating more damage to the environment. We're going to be seeing an increase in, not necessarily veganism and vegetarianism, but an increase and acceptance of cultured meat or synthetic meat. And a number of Israeli companies have been moving into that. Investments have been made. But it's not just the meat. Again, it's a cultural change. We're seeing the millennials coming through. They consume less alcohol. They're more mindful. So less alcohol, less meat, more mindful, more work-life balance relationships. This is also going to be a change which will be impacting us. And in terms of the 17 SDGs, personally, I don't believe we will ever be able to resolve one. I don't believe we will ever see end to poverty. I don't believe we will ever see end of hunger. I don't believe we will ever see an end of wars. Why? Because power and greed is inherent in our DNA as humans. Unless if we had a one single totalitarian state which controlled everyone and everything, which I'd rather not have. But I don't believe this in itself is an achievable target, but it's certainly something to be striving for, especially with all the others together. So definitely something to be looking at, but how do we engage with that? Which leaves us to ESG as an asset class, as a product. Is it a product? Is it a process? Or is it just a fad? And we've seen significant assets coming into this asset class, 600% annual sort of increase over the last decade. A number of companies have been starting to report on ESG issues. I certainly do not hope it's a fad. I'm seeing it changing from a product to a process as companies are thinking about the process, about the philosophy, about the people, changing people, educating them, bringing in technology to help that. So I'm seeing a shift towards that. And also, it's not just the buy side, it's also the sell side. It is the MSCIs, the JP Morgans working with BlackRocks, the green bonds, the indices which are making sense to provide some transparency. But it's a long-term game. It's not a short-term game. And if we think about this in terms of an allocation into a fund, it's not, is it really generating an excess alpha in the near term? This is more than alpha. So, is ESG sustainable? Well, if we look at it as an investment product, if you just look at it as an alpha, you're missing the point. ESG and impact investing is beyond alpha. It is about the broader added goods and positive elements that we can bring in. Also, the other point to note is that we've only seen ESG in a lower yielding, ample liquidity environment in the broader economy. How will ESG react once the cycle turns? So we need a little bit longer time to assess the benefit of ESG within a portfolio construction. But some asset owners and asset managers, you amongst them obviously, are committed to this. And whether it's sort of generating a little bit more alpha in the near term is not the point. We're seeing through the cycle and the added benefits it will be making broader in the portfolio construction, but also in the impact we're having with corporates around the world. But what impact are we seeing in the real world? We are experiencing a truly generational change, but we're also seeing a lot of shift away from globalization, the moving less liberal and more nationalistic. And this is something we need to address, especially as the growth in ESG will be required more in the developing world. And China, India, and Africa more particularly. So where do I see the world in 2050? Just concluding my final thoughts. I think the world will be bigger. I think the world has shrunk over the last couple of decades. Since the sort of 80s and 90s, the world has shrunk. I can get blueberries from Argentina. I don't even think about it. I can go to New York, I can go to Australia. I can do sort of Hong Kong, Tokyo, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and back in London in a week. That won't necessarily be taking place. And also, we're going to be thinking more locally, even for our energy sources of power. We won't be needing the wind farms. We can do that locally, local produce. So in that sense, I think the world will be becoming smaller, however, eating the local produce, the prefab housing, traveling less, and so on, all these impacts that we make are not going to be making a difference if we only link in our small zones of Europe. It won't work. It may make us feel better that we're doing our part. It's not going to make any difference to the world unless we can make a change to the countries and the regions which will be needing that most. And these really are sort of China, India, Africa. So it is up to us really to ensure ESG sustainability going forward and really make it into a process and a belief rather than just on a product and a fact. But just relying on our own habits here in the Western world is not going to be sufficient. So thank you very much for that presentation, and I would be very happy to take on some questions.
All right,
thank you.
Thank you. Great. specifically, what I'm interested in, because you talked about mindfulness, you know, there's like a general, this is of course, I guess this is like developed country millennials, we're really talking about, you know, Europe and US. Yeah, more mindful, more looking at a home life balance. I'm quite interested, are they less productive? This is slightly my personal experience of hiring millennials, that they are actually quite good at looking after themselves, but I wonder if they're actually any good at producing economic output.
I think they would see productivity in a slightly different way from the older generation.
That seems to be the case, yes.
I think that's, and that's, I don't think that's something we can fight against. We cannot change that. I think we need to utilize that and utilize it in more effective ways and change maybe the ways that we operate in order to encompass that rather than fighting it. I think it would be much more difficult to fight that.
Okay, and now are they economically different? As in buying patterns and from previous generations of the same age?
They are. First of all, they're less interested maybe in the material needs in the same way that we were. I'm sort of a typical product of the 80s. It's about working hard, maybe not as much playing hard, but certainly working hard. So going to the office 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning and not leaving until necessary, 7, 8, 9 o'clock when you're starting. This is very different. Our target in the 80s was to consume things, buy a house, buy a car, get a better car, more expensive suits, ties, and so on. We know it. That is not there anymore. It's changed. So economically, they don't care as much as we do on the material things, but they do care in other aspects, which is where the benefit comes through.
Okay, very good. All right, let's see what people have voted for. Oh, massively there.
The US.
You said you predicted a US recession in 2021.
What about
Europe, the UK, and China, etc.?
Just to clarify on 2021, why 2021? It's a combination of economics and politics. We have elections in 2020 with Trump, and he's very street smart. Even if we see the gradual economy slowing down in terms of the US, he will intervene, whether from a fiscal perspective or through infrastructure projects with Democrats to push the recession into 2021. That's why I think it's going to be 2021. It's going to be politically motivated. In terms of Europe, no, I do not see a recession in Europe. I see a slowdown. China, there's too much doom and gloom about China. I didn't have time to expand on China. I think if there was a trade war, China would win the trade war versus the US. President Xi does not have the term limits. He controls the messaging in terms of the broader country. The tools that he can use it's a planned economy, so he can focus in the areas which are weakening and focus on more domestic growth. They control the Beijing consensus, and they have the nuclear option of selling treasuries if they're pushed too much in the corner, which they won't. So no recession in China. I do not expect a recession in Europe. No, it's a slowdown, and nothing in the US until 2021. So I'm positive the global economic environment compared to the market consensus.
How can we convince the developing world to make more efforts in ESG?
Engaging and education, and this is way above my pay grade in terms of what needs to be done. But empathy, engaging, education, not patronizing, and I think the more the Western environment, the more united the Western world is in its messaging and education, the more effective it will be. If we ourselves are fighting, whether it's Trump versus Gore or Europe versus the US, this is not providing a consistent messaging where it is needed most. So it's certainly not patronizing, but empathy, education, and engagement. At a corporate level, which is crucial, and again, this whole concept of passive versus active, the concept is, well, active managers, we can make a choice as to whether we go for this company or that company, industry in the end. But yet the passive guys say, at least we're engaging with those guys. We're engaging with the corporates you don't like and trying to make change from within. So there are big issues which we need to address and discuss very much in our industry.
I've got a couple more questions whilst we're seeing if anyone else. We've got about 5 more minutes or so. One is this relationship you already mentioned between Trump and the states in the United States? Because obviously Trump went through in Paris and sort of kind of denied climate change and wanted to pull out the Kyoto, and then suddenly California turns around and says, well, we don't care what you believe, but we're going to, in any case, implement all the Kyoto Protocol. So how important is Trump when it comes to environmental change then?
Well, I think Trump is important because he's a message that people can allude to, and they can use as an anchor if they do not want to pursue the more environmentally friendly concepts. Also, I believe, and again, I have not checked, but I do want to check, that at the next G20, where I believe please don't quote me on this, I think it's in Japan, apparently the US has forced that this whole topic of ESG and climate is not going to be on the agenda. I want to double check that. I just heard it yesterday, so I need to check. But it is an example of where politics can influence at the government level, even if it's not imposed at a state, at a corporate, or an individual level.
Okay, so a follow-up question really about Trump. I'm getting most people I know who are professional in the investment world in Europe generally sort of don't have very much time for Trump. I think that's fairly well established. But recently, I've also had conversations where professional investors are going, he doesn't seem to have messed anything up. Socially, absolutely, but in terms of economically, kind of not, despite the fact that you think he's sort of, and it would be incapable of it. What's your view on that?
Well, just to say on the first point, one of the reasons I thought Trump was going to make it in 2016 is because I was having chats with my colleagues in the US, educated, fund managers or CIOs, and they were voting for Trump. And I said, guys, are you real? And they were. They said, he's going to deliver. He's not as bad as people say it is. We want change. So our equivalents in the US were voting for Trump. And to answer your question, I think Trump has a lot of issues, but he also has some fair points. And in terms of Germany, in terms of NATO, I think he's right in terms of saying 2% NATO. Guys, you're either with NATO or you're not. We should be paying the 2% part of the GDP towards NATO. And I think there's some fairness on that. But broadly, the economy that he got from is really the sort of the continuation of the post-crisis growth. So we cannot allocate the growth that he's seeing because of him. No. The fiscal easing policy, which is going to sustain the growth, is going to create problems in the future. So I'm positive the US dollar right now, because of the positive growth differentials and interest rate differentials, but I think the dollar will start turning around when the economy slows because of the twin deficits. So he is fueling the economy, but I think it's going to be, he's creating a bubble, which is going to be adversely impacting in a few years' time.
Okay, let's see what else we've got. How can the UN promote the SDGs? Nobody on the street knows it. Yes, that's true. No normal people aren't really aware of them. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I was thinking about that, and maybe very naive from my part, but the message I've been getting all the sort of years from UN, from Greenpeace, from everyone, to save our planet, save our planet, save our planet. It's not about saving our planet. It is not about saving our planet. Our planet does not have a problem. It does not have a problem. Even if we do the worst things on the planet, it does not have a problem. It will re-engineer itself. That's what it's always done, and it will do that. We have the problem. It's the humans which have the problem, not the planet. The planet will re-engineer itself. So I think the messaging, it shouldn't be about the planet. It's about us. It's about humanity. Personalize it. The planet will be fine. Even if we nuke it all up, it'll take millions of years, but it will reestablish itself. It'll refine a balance without us on it. So it's about us, not about the planet. I'm not sure if that would make any change, but I think personalizing may
very
focus on
interesting.
the
Yeah. Final question. Coming back to Trump, do you think that the US's ESG development will basically be incredibly slow as long as he is the leader? So it comes back to your point saying that, is that going to get in the way? You know, beautiful coal, as you pointed out yourself.
I think ESG is slow. Even 2040, we're not going to be seeing big change, realistically. It's great to have visions and themes and so on, but being realistic, 2040, we're not going to be having anything different. It's more like the end of the century. If we're targeting anything, it should be 2060, 2080, 2100. 2040, if you think about it, it's 20 years from now. It's not that far. Even 2100 is not that far. But it will take time, and Trump is not going to make it easier, so we need to see beyond Trump. In the same way that if we look at Netanyahu, we saw Netanyahu and Obama, okay? Netanyahu and Obama were the two people, they hated each other more than anything. And Netanyahu just saw through Obama, he thought, you know what? You're going to be out, either in this term or the next term. So he made his policy thinking longer term, and he achieved what he achieved with Trump. In the same way, I think we need to see through Trump. It's going to take time. Anyhow. So he can't put a stop to it. He is putting a brake. Let's hope there's this sort of Trumpian world we can address by the education, by the involvement, by the engagement, and get the buy-in from the people. At an individual level, very important, at a corporate level.
Fine, and then leave it, and then think in 10, 20,
yes,
30 years' time.
Totally.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is Papas
Thank you,
Havas. Thank you.
Thank you.